Bill Morris. He's a senior research associate and has more than 22 years of experience in transit planning. He's been involved in public transportation planning in operating environments and research environments. Mr. Morris was a project manager at Lynx, or the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority, as well as HART, the transit system in Tampa. Throughout his years at CUTR, Mr. Morris has been a principal investigator for major transit development plan updates for Gainesville, Panama City, Key West, Fort Walton Beach, Pensacola, Fort Myers, Port St. Lucie, and Jacksonville. He has assisted in the development of transit plans in Sarasota, Fort Myers, Vero Beach, West Palm Beach, and St. Augustine, and his areas of expertise include strategic planning, public involvement, service planning, and federal and state grants for public transportation. So certainly has a wealth of experience, and so then without any further ado, I will hand the presentation over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Amber, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar series this afternoon. I wanted to start out by saying that a few years ago, before this webinar program began, we conducted a study for the National Center for Transit Research on best practices in extra-board management. And I'll just take a second to explain what that is in case you don't know, but extra-board has to do with the number of operators maintained by a transit agency on a daily basis who are not assigned to a particular run. So when an extra board operator reports to work, they cover those shifts that are vacated by operators who may be sick or for whatever reason couldn't make it to work that day. And as a result, actually it was a very difficult topic to research. There really was not a lot of information out there in the world on that. But then as a result of that study, one of the outcomes was kind of how there was not much of an understanding about the role of bus dispatch in managing extra board drivers as well, extra board operators as well as other things. And so kind of the approach that we took then when we embarked on this particular project is, we kind of have an understanding between transit systems of what the overall mission of bus dispatch is, but then at the same time, there isn't a lot of cataloging of how those bus dispatch offices actually operate. What are their roles? What are their functions? How are they set up? How are they different? How are they the same? And so that was kind of what we were looking at relative to the overall objectives, trying to catalog the functions, looking at the interface of dispatch with other aspects of a transit organization, summarizing, though there are not that many in existence, standard operating policies, procedures, and responsibilities, and then to the extent possible, identifying best practices within the industry, both in terms of actual practices and also technology. So with that, here is a list of the tasks. We actually conducted a survey of transit agencies here in Florida after having conducted kind of a modest literature review. And then from there we picked two case studies where we actually went into the dispatch environment and did observations. The first system is VOTRAN in Daytona Beach, Florida, and then the second is PSTA, which is the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority in Clearwater and St. Petersburg, Florida. And then from there we came up with the synthesis and conclusions. And then we took also a model from Miami-Dade County on their standard operating procedure and then developed a standard operating procedure that could be adaptable for other transit systems. So moving into the results of the survey of Florida transit agencies, we did have a total of 28 questions. We distributed the survey through SurveyMonkey. And we ended up having 48 dispatch and operations supervision personnel responding from 9 different transit agencies, and then the results of the survey were then crossed out. Now, I won't be presenting any crosstabs today, but I will tell you, because we had multiple responses from within certain agencies, we actually did have sometimes when dispatchers gave different answers to the same question. So here are the 9 systems here in Florida that did respond to the survey. We had a good representation of small, which we consider to be under 50 or under 250 buses. I'm sorry, under 100 buses, and then 100 to 250, and then over 250. So we had participation from Miami-Dade Transit, which is our one large transit system here in the state of Florida. So under current position held, this is kind of the breakdown for the group. A majority of the respondents were either dispatchers or transportation or operations supervisors. I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about how those two can, in many cases, be together. And then a majority of dispatchers from the survey were bus operators prior to the time that they became a dispatcher. This becomes kind of significant when you look at the fact of one of the things that we found in the Extrovert project is that there is not a lot of science to the science, meaning that transit agencies have a tendency through history and tradition over time of determining their operating policies as opposed to having structured reasons for making the decisions they make. The physical setup was about half and half, where the window and radio dispatch functions are located together, and about half where they are separate. Now, recently I had a question as to what does it mean when you refer to a window function versus a radio function? And the window function essentially is when the dispatcher is interacting with operators when they are checking in for work, getting their assignment, getting the assignment of their coach for the day, etc. And then the radio function obviously is that function that deals with two-way communications with operators in the field. And then the relationship between the window, radio, and road supervisor functions, one of the things that we found from this particular survey is that for the most part, dispatchers are considered supervisors, which means they can, on a rotating basis, work either the window function, the radio function, or even be out in the field doing the road supervision functions. And that was about 59% of the survey. Now, interestingly enough, when we did the case studies of VOTRAN and STA, this is not the case in either of those two agencies. Dispatchers are one set of positions, and then road supervisors are another. From there, we gave dispatchers a list of various functions and duties related to their position. And we asked the question kind of in two ways. One was, what are the most important functions that you fulfill regardless of how much time you spend on it? And then secondly, what are the most important functions you have in relation to the amount of time you spend on it? So here on a scale of 1 to 3 are the average ratings, and clearly the communication and coordination of service regarding vehicle and manpower availability is the most important function. Maintaining close coordination with maintenance for coach availability, which is pretty much a dynamic issue that is faced by transit agencies on a daily basis. Double checking correct work assignments, schedule adherence for operators when leaving and returning to the garage, and then checking operators for their uniform appearance upon checking in. And then the 6 most important items, regardless of time spent, is kind of a variation of the previous question, maybe falling in slightly different. But assuring the availability of operators and equipment for work assignments also fell within this particular group. Customer complaints, there are some dispatch offices who do have the direct responsibility of taking customer calls routed to dispatch to provide real-time and also schedule information. About 20% of systems reported that, or 20% of respondents reported that. But then another over 50% had a relationship with customer service where the reps could call them to get specific information relative to particular real-time information. And then about a quarter of respondents indicated that they do not handle customer or information requests at all. One of the things I can clearly tell you is that for those who do have the responsibility of taking customer calls directly, they really wish they didn't have that particular responsibility. Okay, incident management and how handled. This is in a relation, I think, to what we would call the level of empowerment within dispatch in terms of who has overall responsibility. So we had a little over a quarter of our respondents say that dispatch actually has the lead responsibility for road calls, accidents, and other incidents, wherein 42% indicated that dispatchers act in a support function to road supervisors who are actually in the lead. And then we had about another quarter say that incident management may at times either be in the hands of either the dispatchers or the supervisors. And again, one of the things I can tell you here is that regardless of the level of empowerment, there is a lot of collaboration between dispatch and supervision in terms of how to address incidents. Okay, extra board management. This one got a little bit melded with overtime, but about 55% of respondents said that dispatch has total management authority for extra board operators as well as overtime assignments. About 12.5% said they have to coordinate with operations managers, and then about 27%, 28% said dispatchers have no management authority for overtime assignments. So I think in retrospect, this question might have been a little better if we had parsed it out between the two issues. One is just overall extra board management versus management of overtime. But I think in most cases, dispatch does pretty much have overall management control with extra board operators on a day-to-day basis. We had 54% of respondents indicated that they have too few extra board operators. Another 39% said that they had it just about right, and a few respondents said that maybe they have a few too many extra board operators. Okay, the first thing with coordinating with maintenance regarding vehicle availability, the first question was, how does this take place? So we had 37% via phone call, 20% with an email or messaging system, but really very few of the respondents in this survey indicated that there is like a fully integrated lot management and maintenance software, between operations and maintenance. I'm sorry, I thought there was one other slide in here. Anyway, there was another question that asked about how often is there a communication between maintenance and dispatch regarding coach availability. And at a minimum, there is usually an overnight. And the overnight essentially is when maintenance pulls coaches scheduled for the next day and then provides dispatch with a list of all of the coaches that are available for that day. But then that becomes dynamic later in the day as buses break down and changeouts have to occur. So sometimes the buses that are planned to be out of service will actually have to go into service. Okay, this is, we asked the systems to let us know what technologies are available to dispatch. And we had only one system, which is a very small system in Panama City, Baytown Trolley, that indicated that they did not have most of the technologies yet. Most of our systems do have all of the various computer-aided dispatch, AVL CAD, those kinds of things available to them. So on training, there were 71% of respondents who indicated they were trained on the job, with 1 in 5, 20% indicated that there was some agency provided training before the dispatch duties actually commenced. So once again, the notion of kind of history and tradition within operations of a transit agency, this kind of indicates then that this is how policies and procedures are kind of communicated from generation to generation. All right, here is a picture of the console at Votran from the observation that we did. This is an integrated avail system with AVL, CAD, etc. What I'll note for you if you look at the right side of the screen, that is a list of all of the buses and operators that are in service at any given time. And you'll see that there are a couple records there that are in red, and that indicates that the bus is operating hot or is operating early. And then the color below that, kind of gold that appears on this screen, is operators who are running late. So what happens is then the system automatically brings those operators to the top so that the dispatchers can see if things are not running on time for that particular moment. And then to the left, obviously, is a screen where they can see all of the locations of the buses in real time as the service day commences. So when we did the observations, we essentially just kind of had a structure of a spreadsheet where we tried to record information. Things in dispatch move very quickly, so there are times when you just have to try to do the best you can to record what's happening, but then after it was over, then we tried to establish these categories for what was happening within the service day as a way of then kind of so that we could code each of the incidents in order to come up with a hierarchy. And so here are the frequencies then for the overall observations. The radio check is the occurrence in the morning when the bus operator is leaving the yard, and they do a check with the radio operator to ensure that two-way communications are established. In the case of Votran, there were 29 calls for passenger information. And then from there, we kind of broke it down to equipment incidents, service incidents, passenger incidents, and then operator incidents. And so, and then from there, the hierarchy was there was the incident, there was the decision and the action on the incident, and then there was the resolution to the incident. So that's kind of how we kept track of incidents as they were occurring, being addressed, and then being resolved over a period of time. So we had an overall 147 observations at Votran for that particular day. Okay. Here is a picture of the radio console at PSTA. There are actually two stations, one for the North County, one for the South County. And this one has a very kind of similar setup, although there are a few more screens, but there is an AVL screen, a map where the dispatchers can look at service in real time where the buses are located, as well as a record of all of the operators and runs that are on the street at that particular time. So at PSTA, the window function has a kind of a very set categories of functioning, and that is operator check-in and coach assignment, and then another dispatcher to deal with absentees and extra board management. And then for the radio control room, then there were a few fewer categories than we had for Votran. But that's because dispatchers at PSTA have a little bit more of a direct role in deciding how incidents are, what action is to be taken, and how they are to be resolved. So here are the frequencies for that. So there were probably more equipment incidents at PSTA that day than anything else. There was actually one collision, one accident that particular day. So we had 6 observations of action that was taken on the accident and the collision, for that day, for a total of about 65 observations. So now just kind of moving into what the overall conclusion is in terms of the function of dispatch. It is all about incident management. It is all about labor management, and it's about equipment management. In the case of labor management, I can tell you that dispatchers not only are dealing with issues related to the operators, but the supervisors, with the maintenance techs, customer service agents, and in some cases even other aspects. Incident management, essentially operators, one of the things that makes dispatch so fascinating is that on the one hand, the same exact thing has to happen every single day, which is service has to get on the street. But then every single day is absolutely different because you just don't, there's no way to plan for what incidents are going to occur throughout the day. And then equipment is clearly related to the decisions that are made, whether buses have to be pulled from service and whether they have to be replaced with another bus from the lot. Best practices, and this is specifically from the case studies that we conducted, but one of the monitoring of the on-time performance at Votran, one of the things that dispatcher is able to do is monitor the buses that are supposed to be converging on the main transfer point. And then if there's any bus that's going to be late, then the actual transfer point itself can be managed in terms of holding buses back to make transfers, and also communicating with the other operators to let them know which operator is going to be late. And then also the ability just to know one way or another whether an operator is operating hot or late, and then trying to diagnose what the problem is to help them get back on time. On the mobile data terminals, one of the things that dispatchers are able to do is target their communications. So, for instance, if there is a particular piece of information that only affects a small segment of operators within the system, rather than having a broadcast radio announcement to all operators, those communications can be targeted via mobile data terminal to the operators who are affected. And then finally, the request to talk function enables the radio operator to assess a situation before conferring with the operator. So in the case of Votran, they have that function turned on. The operator's request to talk, it doesn't mean that it's granted immediately, but then the dispatcher can take a couple of minutes or take a minute to look at what's actually going on with that bus before the operator comes in. This also helps the dispatchers a lot with triage in terms of prioritizing various incidents as to which ones need to be addressed first and which ones are secondary. So I would say the most important findings that came out of this, one is that notion of empowerment and which functions of operations are in charge of making decisions and actions on the particular incidents that occur and how they are to be resolved. In the one case study of Votran, it is actually the lead supervisor who makes those decisions. In the case of PSTA, it is the dispatcher who makes those decisions, sometimes in collaboration with the supervisors. The second would be the generalized versus the specialized job duties. Now, like I said earlier, in the case of PSTA and Votran, field supervisors are a different set of positions than bus dispatchers, but we saw in our survey that in a lot of cases those positions are one and the same, and they can rotate between the two. The one thing I can say from the research, from the anecdotal data that the dispatchers gave us in the survey, is that from the standpoint of job satisfaction, they actually like it much better when they are rotating between the two, because they feel like whenever they are working the dispatch function and supervisors are contacting them, they feel like they have a visual and they have an understanding of what the supervisor is addressing because they know they have to do it themselves. Training, and this is specifically related to curriculum-based training. There just does not seem to be a whole lot out there on this particular topic, although recently CUTR and FDOT just offered the very first training course for bus dispatchers, and they're currently evaluating how that initial training went in terms of making future improvements to the program. And then equipment availability and the relationship between and the communication between operations and maintenance. One of the things that we have found is basically when it works good, it works pretty good, and when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. And so it's one of those things that can be a big issue facing dispatchers each day. Extra board management is a challenge. When in the survey, I mentioned over 53% indicated that they had too few extra board operators. And in the two case studies, in both instances, they ran out of extra board operators and had to come up with other ways to cover service. Pace and multitasking is very, very significant. There are, in the case of both of our case studies, operators were attempting to deal with 1, 2, 3 incidents with 4, 5, and 6 still coming in. So there, in many cases, there is a lot of juggling that goes on in terms of both prioritizing, assessing, prioritizing, and coming up with a course of action of how to deal with things going on in the field. Customer service, again, we do have some dispatch offices that have responsibilities for that. They really wish they didn't. In most cases, it's better for them when that function is a separate function. And then finally, most dispatchers were previously operators and were trained on the job, indicating that the formality of standard operating procedures and training is kind of done on a tradition basis. So with that, Amber, hopefully that was a succinct, time-wise, overview of the project, and that completes my part of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Bill. Certainly an important topic as it relates to the functioning of operations in a public transportation system, so all the information you presented is certainly helpful. We're at the point of the presentation right now where we can take questions from the audience, so if you're interested in asking a question, you can type it in the Q&A drop-down manager, and I will moderate those questions for you. Bill, it looks like we have one question so far, and it is, did the study find that it is definitely better for transit agencies to cross-train supervisors and dispatchers to rotate between field supervision and radio functions?
And Amber, I wish I could say that definitively that the research did indicate that that is a better way. Unfortunately, it really has to do, one, with the objectives of the particular agency in question, but then two, what I can say about it is from the aspect of job satisfaction of the employees, they definitely like it better when it's on a rotating basis. I think the risk, if an agency currently has stratification between the two positions, the risk of converting would be you may have certain people who are kind of set in their ways or comfortable with their job and they don't really want it to be disturbed or diversified. But certainly there could be a path for the future if you wanted to say all future hires, will be cross-trained to do both jobs.
Great. And we do have a few questions coming in. I just wanted to remind everybody, though, that today's presentation, or the PowerPoint presentation, is available in the handout section of Live Meeting, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like 3 white pieces of paper, and you can download everything that you've seen today. The next question, Bill, is based on the loads you observed, what are the criteria, or what is the rule of thumb for dispatchers per route or bus?
Are you saying the optimal number of dispatchers?
Per route or bus, yes.
Per bus, okay. There is not a standard that I am aware of. Again, I think in the case of PSTA, I think their peak vehicle requirement is around 150 buses, and there are 2 radio operators dealing with them geographically, both the North County and the South County.
And the next question, did the study involve just fixed route operations, or did it also include paratransit dispatch operations as well?
Yes, this one we wanted to focus on bus dispatch because there is actually more literature on paratransit dispatch because of the dynamic nature of it. But just the other thing is that paratransit dispatch is just such a totally different animal than fixed route. So we wanted to stay focused on fixed route in this particular study.
Great. And another specific question about the people that you surveyed. Among the properties that you surveyed, do you know if the dispatchers were part of the same bargaining unit as the drivers?
That's it's a very good question, and it was not a subject of this particular research. But I will tell you that the operations manager in Florida, at our conference recently, they did discuss that issue quite a bit, and I think it has to do with the notion of hourly employees and bargaining unit employees versus management and salaried employees. And if you have a situation where dispatch are either hourly employees and or bargaining unit employees, then there is a limitation on how much management functioning they can have over operators when they are relatively within the same classification. So yes, that is something that was an issue that was discussed, but it just wasn't a subject of this research.
Great. And we actually have quite a few questions coming in. A couple of them are related to technology. What role, if any, did technology play in helping the dispatchers do their jobs?
Yes. Well, first of all, I can imagine in the past, before a lot of these technological improvements were made, the degree to which dispatchers sort of just had to get a picture in their own head of what was going on in the field. So when an operator called with an incident and indicated their location, the dispatcher would have to figure out, what was going on. At least now they have a tool that is more global. For instance, being able to have a screen that shows every coach and every operator that's in service within the moment, being able to look at the service area in real time to see where the buses are located, having a queue and a record of all of the operator calls that come in through the system. So those are the kinds of things. Well, and then the ability to communicate via a mobile data terminal helps them also focus and more efficiently communicate with operators, because a lot of times radio communications are rendered unnecessary when the communication can be handled through the mobile data terminal. So those are the kinds of things that I think certainly the word that I would use is tools. These technological improvements give dispatchers greater tools by which to do their job. The interesting part of it, though, is the other side of it, the human element, that just absolutely, there can't be enough technology to address the human element of what a dispatcher has to do on a daily basis.
Thank you. And you had mentioned in your presentation that there were two-way communications with maintenance. Do you know whether or not that was the fact for customer service centers as well?
Well, I mean, two-way communications mostly in terms of, at least in our experience, was just by telephone. With customer service having a dedicated telephone number that they could contact the dispatcher to ask for information.
Okay, great. And did dispatch centers keep an active activity log separate from the CAD AVL logs?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'm glad it was asked, because it was, I think, of all the things that really surprised me in both cases with our case study observations. The systems, the computer systems, do not have a mechanism by which, for instance, let's just say an incident can be opened. The dispatcher can then type in information relative to that incident, kind of similar to how emergency services work, where dispatchers do have that ability to type in information to the units that they are dispatching. And so what happened in both cases is that the dispatchers had the queue of calls that came in from the operator, but ultimately they were having to go back later and write hand notes and recall from their own memory as to what happened and what they did and all of that kind of stuff. But that is not a function of the computer-aided dispatch itself. It is just something that they have to do later when they have a little downtime on all of the incidents.
Great, and there are actually quite a few questions in the queue about the development or the offering of the dispatch training course that you mentioned, and I guess I can take that question, Bill, if you'd like.
Sure.
So the Florida Department of Transportation worked very closely on this project, and then as a result of it and numerous requests, we actually worked to develop a dispatch training course. And it is currently, it was offered a few weeks ago in the state of Florida here. It will be offered probably sometime in early 2013, but it is only offered to Florida's public transportation employees or professionals. So if you are a member of one of the Florida agencies, we will probably notify you sometime in early 2013 of the next offering of it. It is offered regionally throughout the state of Florida, and we're hoping to offer it at least twice in 2013, but it is only available this time for the Florida agencies. And Bill, the next question. Regarding covering work assignments for operators, do dispatchers in the systems surveyed scheduled both same-day assignments, for example, sick calls, as well as next-day assignments?
Actually, that's actually a question from the ESTR board study, but yeah, I mean, definitely with same-day assignments, but then there's also the planned absenteeism that they're aware of with operators who are out on sick leave or FMLA or whatever, and yes, so that is coordinated by dispatch on a daily basis.
All right, and what are the future needs of for this profession in terms of education and training?
Well, I think it's fairly significant. One of the things, Amber, with the curriculum-based training that you all are sort of developing at the global level right now, probably eventually needs to be adaptable at the agency level, so that, for instance, if standard operating procedures are developed at the agency level, then there can be curriculum-based training for dispatchers that sort of mirror those. And that training can take place, prior to, or at least in conjunction with the assumption of duties, as opposed to, just kind of being thrown into the environment and then having a senior dispatcher guide you through the training process in order to learn the ropes. I think that's a huge need to have not only curriculum-based training that is at the professional development level, but then also as well at the agency level. Because I don't think there's a lot of it out there.
Well, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and we'll certainly take that into account as we start to offer the 2013 classes, so thank you for that. And then this is an interesting question. Do many dispatchers use the text messaging features of cell phones? And of course, that response is going to vary based on state, because in the state of Florida, we certainly have rules related to cell phones and public transportation systems. But Bill, did you want to take that?
No, that was not anything probed in this research, so no, I don't have anything on that.
Okay. That actually looks like it concludes the Q&As. We certainly had a lively discussion, lots of questions. Thank you to all of you who wrote in your questions. We certainly appreciate it. The most important part of this process is really participation and interaction. So thank you to everyone who asked a question. And just as a reminder, the presentation for today is in the handout section of live meeting. It looks like 3 white pieces of paper. It's an icon on the top right-hand corner of your screen. You can access Bill's PowerPoint presentation as well as, I believe, his contact information should you have any additional questions. And thank you, Bill, for presenting today. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Amber. Okay.
If you could provide us feedback on this survey, it would be fantastic. Thank you again. This concludes our webinar today.